Yes. Oh, I don't know what I just, sorry.
Okay, so what questions do you have for me?
So I'm really struggling with functions right now. I was able to get some help with the assignments, but and I've like gone over them again to try and do them myself, and I feel like I'm just doing them now out of memorizing them, but I don't really understand what I'm doing, and I'm not really sure what I can do to make myself understand it better.
Okay, so which exercises are you doing right now?
I am on functions. I'm on 4.3 optional arguments, which I did do the exercise. Again, I was able to get help because my fiance is a software engineer, so he does understand some of this stuff. So once he went over it with me, I was able to do the exercise, but I still just feel like I don't understand any of it.
Have you done any JavaScript before?
I haven't.
You haven't. Okay, so what I recommend to a lot of students is that if it's possible, they can do some external exercises.
Okay.
For example, there's a free course on Codecademy.
On Codecademy?
Yeah, Codecademy. I'll send it to you.
Okay.
They have a free JavaScript course, and very often when our students do short courses from other platforms, they are able to see the same thing in a different light, and it helps them understand the concepts.
Okay.
So it's something I would recommend you to do. So, I mean, right now I can go over the concepts with you very quickly and see if it helps.
Okay.
If that, you know, if something is something you want.
Yeah, sure. Maybe you can explain something to me that'll help it click better.
Yeah. So you're on functions,
Yeah, so section 4.
optional arguments.
Yeah.
Do you understand the concept of function though?
I mean, I understand that you create the function to do something, but it's all the different terminology and stuff is just it's a little confusing.
Okay, so let me see if I can get a drawing board up or something. Hold on. Okay, do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so the thing you have to understand about function is that it's just a box, right? So, or a machinery, a box that contains some kind of machinery inside. And here, let me get the. Okay, let's say you have a box. This is your function, okay? Or X. And it's up to you what you define the box to do. So whatever machinery is inside, that's up to you. And you will have an input or multiple inputs depending on what you define as well. Okay. And then these inputs go into this box, you do something to it, and you get something out. So these are outputs. Okay. So this is what a function is. In mathematical terms, this is how we write it. F, this is an F. I'm using a trackpad, so it's quite bad. F brackets X. So this is a function, and X is the input. So this is essentially a function. What the function does, it depends on the programmer. what they write inside the function. So I'm going to clear this. Okay. So for example, we're going to look at some basic functions here. So this one is a function that we define. And the way we define functions in JavaScript is we use the function term right here. And we immediately follow up with the brackets. And inside the bracket is where we define what the inputs are. You don't have, like, not all functions need input, right? So some functions can have no inputs, some can have 1, some can have 5, 10. It's all up to us. So for example, this function, the goal of this function is to square the input. So whatever we get in, we call it x. We return, so we give out x times x. So that's squaring x, right? So if we put in 5 and we execute a function with the 5 as the input, so 5 here, you just imagine it being replaced with x. I mean, x being replaced with 5. So we put 5 as x, so it will return 5 times 5, which is 25. Okay, so this is a simple square function. And this one doesn't have any inputs. You can see here between the brackets, it's empty. So when we call it, we don't have to put anything inside. But what this function does is it calls the console log function, which is it's a default function that comes with JavaScript, especially on a browser. What it does is it will print something into the console, and the console is usually where we try to debug programs. So this is a function called greet, which calls another function inside the box, inside the body or the box. Okay, so it calls a JavaScript default function, which will print hello world into the console.
Okay.
So because we are not returning anything from the function, there's no output. When we call this function, when we call greet, when we execute it, a call is the same as executing, okay? We usually say call, we would call a function instead of executing a function. So it's the same thing. So when we call greet, we get the console log hello world, but we also get another output, which is undefined, because we're not returning anything from greet. That's why it's returning the undefined value.
Okay.
Okay, so when Java, it's different on different programming language. On JavaScript, a function can return something and it also can return nothing. And when it returns nothing, by default, it will return undefined. Is it clear up to this point?
Yeah.
Okay. So here we have another simple function. It's just add. We will try to add 2 inputs together. So we call them x and y. You can put anything here. Like you can name it anything you want. You can name it A or B, or like number 1, number 2, anything you want. It's just easy naming x and y because it's just following math conventions. So this one, what it does is it will return the sum of x and y. So you do return x plus y, and we get, when we call it with 5 and 9, we get 14.
Okay.
So
yeah, this one's very straightforward.
Yeah.
Seems like.
So here is something about functions. So functions as values. So you've already seen it. We've been using functions as values all the way, like throughout this page. Because what we do is when we create a function, so when we define the function, it's just a value, like doesn't do anything until we actually call it, right? So when we define the function, we can store it in a variable. So when we store it in a variable, this square variable, what it's holding is it's holding the definition of this function, so that we can use it anytime we want. We can use it more than once as well. So we can call square 5, square 10, square 20. So this is what we mean by function as values. We can store it inside a variable.
Okay.
It's just a way to store functions. So like, for example, if you have a box, a machine, that makes toast, and we call it a toaster. It's just a way to, to name things, name these functions, so we can easily use them in our programs.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay. So imagine this is a toaster function. This is like a knead dough function, something like that. So this one, I wrote this because it's the important thing about parameters that you have to understand is when you define it during the function definition, it just have to make it make sense. Like the parameter name, it should make sense. So for example, this one, it's supposed to be telling you what field the engine is using. So we name the input field, right? So what it does is it will print engine using the input field into the console, right? So when we do engine gas, it will print out engine using gas, and here engine using diesel. We can name the parameter, or the parameter is the same thing as inputs. It means the same thing. So you can name it whatever you want. You can have more than one, you can have none, etc.
Okay.
So this page makes sense, right? So far.
Yeah.
Okay. So this part is about scope. So when you have a box, when you have a function box, okay, everything you define inside the function box can only be used within the box. So if you had a box and you made a box yourself and you have some machinery inside, you cannot take the parts from the inside of the box and take it out and use it somewhere else. That's what scope means. Scope just means you have your box and everything inside can only be used inside the box. That's it.
Okay.
That's all it means. Okay. So this is a function. And when you define a variable inside this function, this variable result can only be used inside this function. If you try to console log result outside of the function, you'll get undefined.
Okay.
That's all it means. This is within the scope of the multiply function, all these things in here. Okay.
Okay, that makes sense. I didn't understand what a scope was before, so now I have a better understanding of that.
Okay. So this is the example I was referring to. So if you had, for example, if you had faith num created outside, this is the global scope, right? This is where the root scope of your whole program, this global scope. And then here you're creating a function. So inside this function, you have your local scope of the function, okay? Everything in here, but note something, okay? This x, we didn't create it with a variable because this x is from here, from the input parameter.
Okay.
So this x is going to be only used in here as well. So whether you are talking about input variables or variables that you actually create, like in this function where you create a result function, a result variable, all these are going to be within the scope of the function. So x, y, and result. Okay, so all of these are inside the scope, cannot be used outside. Okay, so here we are doing console log double faith num. So we passing this variable, which is storing the number 5 to this. Okay, to the double
Mhm.
function. So 5 goes in, 5 equals 5 times 2. It looks like we are trying to give x a new value, right? So x is supposed to be faith num, okay? But what
Mhm.
actually happened is that because this x is within the scope of double, when we give it a new value, so we reassign a new value to x, it doesn't actually change the faith num variable on the outer scope.
Okay. So confuses me a little bit. As far as actually, never mind. I think I understand.
Okay, so because even though we are passing faith num, the variable, to double as the input, but because x is within the local scope of double and you reassign it, you are not going to affect faith num, which is on the outside.
Okay.
However, if for I'll make an example for you right now if we did it otherwise. Okay.
Mhm.
I think this is going to take a bit longer. It's going to run over at least another 15 minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm just letting you know.
Oh, that's okay. It's fine for me.
Okay. Why is it taking so long? Okay, so this is our original example. But if I didn't define x and I went ahead and used faith num here, then the second console log, when you try to console log the value of faith num, it will become 10. So right here. And the reason is we're not using a variable within the scope of the double function. We're using a variable that's in the global scope.
Okay.
You see what I mean? But
Yeah.
if you did this, here, this is going to be tricky, okay? Just stick with me. X is the
Okay.
input. Okay, X is the input. And here
Mhm.
we are taking X multiplied by 2 and assigned to the variable faith num. So this faith num has a far in front. And this faith num is within the scope of double. Okay?
Uh-huh.
So they're separate. These are two variables, even though they have the same name, but they live in different scope. This one is in the global scope. This one is in the local scope of the double function. So we
Okay.
have the global scope faith num, which is 5, to the double function. So 5 is going to replace x, which means 5 times 2, it's 10, and we assign to the faith num, the local faith num. Okay, so if we console log now, you'll see that the second console log is 5, because we're not altering the global scope faith num. We're creating a new faith num variable inside the double function. It lives inside. And if you didn't
Okay.
have the far, you'll get 10 because you're altering the global faith num. So the far keyword is extremely important.
Okay.
So that's scope. That's it.
Okay, that
Anything
seems
that's created inside, any variable that's created inside function is going to be within the scope of the function. It has no interaction with anything outside of the function.
okay, that makes sense.
Okay, so this is the same thing. It's the same example. You have var x inside and a var x outside. This is global, this is local. It's the same example.
Okay.
So that's the scope. What it's saying is that when you have a box, okay, inside the box, you can put other boxes as well. So you can define a function within a function. And the reason we might do that is because sometimes we want everything to be put into a box. So for example, you have an oven machine, right? An oven. Okay. Inside an oven, there are many different parts. There's the part that handles the temperature control. There's the part that maybe if you're roasting a chicken and you're putting it on a stick and you're spinning it, there's that part as well. And then maybe there's a fan part, and then maybe there's the display part, etc. But the whole oven is one box. But then each part of the oven is their own box as well. So you're putting boxes inside a main box.
Okay, I understand. So it's like, inside the box, different things are gonna have different functions.
Different things are gonna have their own box. So inside the main oven function, you will also have other functions, and each function deals with a specific thing.
Okay.
So that's the idea. That's why we might do this, because you want to put everything inside one big function, and then you want to have smaller functions inside that do very specific things.
Okay, that makes sense.
And they all work together to create the outcome you want. Okay, so here we have a decorator function. We have a thing called the star function, which just tries to add this asterisk character to the result string. And we have a stripe function, which will add just a hyphen. So what we do is we take an input phrase. Okay, these are function definitions. We're not calling them. Okay, so we're only defining what they do. So the real execution starts here. So the result string is an empty string to begin with. We do stripe 3. So what it does, it will add 3 asterisk. And it will do add 3 stripes. And then it will do star 2, so 2 stars. And then you add the phrase, which is the input. And then you do 2 star and 3 stripes.
Can you explain the plus equals, what the difference is between like equals and plus equals?
This is the shortcut of equal result plus phrase.
Okay.
Okay, so result equals result plus phrase. The shortcut is result plus equals phrase. They're the same thing.
Okay.
It's just a shorter form to write it.
Okay, I understand.
Okay. So, and then you do a count plus plus, which is manipulating this outside, this variable outside. So this is a global scope variable. Okay, so this is the only global variable. Everything is within the local scope of decorator. Apart from this, okay? So if we did JavaScript as the input, which will replace phrase, we get this 3 stripes, 2 stars, JavaScript, 2 stars, 3 stripe.
Okay.
Count as 1 because we do count plus plus here.
What does the plus plus mean?
Here. Same. Just adding 1 to it.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So if we run the function again, count is going to be 2 because count is a global variable. It keeps the memory. If we put count inside, it will always be reset to 0. So that's a difference. When you have a local scope, everything inside the scope of the function is recreated when you run the function.
Okay.
So if we try to use a function that's only defined in a, as we try to use a variable that's only defined inside a function, we'll get undefined reference error. Because it's not in the global scope. It's inside the scope.
It's inside.
Yeah, exactly. So these blocks, like these if statements, they don't have scope. Okay. So you can still call full here.
Okay.
So full will be best because you're changing the global scope. Okay. So that's
okay. That makes sense.
Oh, one more thing I want to tell you is I think I skipped about nested scope. You see this result here, because this result is in the local scope of decorator. But then when you create another function, this is a nested scope inside decorator. You can use variables inside the root scope of decorator. That's why you can use it here.
Okay.
Okay. It's just the same as count being used here. It's the same idea. Result can be used here from here. You just cannot, it's the same thing. Okay. So optional arguments. Sometimes when you write a function, you have no idea how many inputs the user is going to give you. So for example, the console log or the alert function, these are default JavaScript functions. The JavaScript engine that has it. Like they allow you to put in one or more than one inputs. So what happens when we don't know how many inputs we're going to get from the user? What we do is we can use the here, where is it? Oh. Where's the arguments? Oh, we're not talking about that yet. Okay, sorry. I thought we were talking about that. Okay, I guess it's talking about something else. Okay, it's saying the alert function only accepts one argument, but if you put in more than one, it's not going to throw an error. It will just ignore the second and third input. But console log, so if I run console log, I can put in multiple. You see? It will print multiple. So console log accepts more than one. Okay, so what's this? Okay, so if you define an input and you don't actually give it a value when you call the function, that input will be undefined.
Okay.
You see, because we're not putting anything here between the brackets. When we try to console log arg arg, it will be undefined. So here we're talking about optional arguments, okay? The main input that we want, argument, parameter, input, they're the same thing. they're, they're different names for the same thing. Okay, argument, input, and parameter. It's the same. So string is the main input. Symbol is the optional input, which means the user doesn't have to give you a value for symbol every time. But what we do inside a function is we handle the scenario if the user is not supplying a value for symbol. Okay, so what we do is we use an if statement to check whether symbol is undefined, which means the user hasn't supplied a value. Okay, and if so, we assign a default value to symbol, which is the snake character. So now we beautify the string by sandwiching it with the symbol. Okay, so here, the first time we call it, we are giving a value for symbol, which is star, and you will get this star. I love JavaScript star, but here we're not giving a value for symbol, so we get symbol assigned as snake, so we get this.
Okay.
So what we mean by optional argument is that we define an input, but we also handle the scenario where the user doesn't supply the value for the input. That's it.
So where does the star come from? Like where in the function is that defined?
The star or the star?
Yeah.
The star is here. It comes from here.
Okay.
So star.
Okay, I was thinking about it in terms of like, right, like how the assignments are, where like the console log is already written for you. So I'm just like thinking about the function itself, but I understand.
No, so this is the console log function, and this is the beautifier function. So we call the beautifier function first, which is this. The star is the value for symbol. And because symbol is now not undefined, it has the star value. So this if statement is going to be false. This doesn't get run. So this is skipped. And all we're doing is returning symbol plus string plus symbol. So star plus I love JavaScript and then star. And we're returning this whole string back to the console log function. So now we print it.
Okay. Yeah, I understand now.
Okay, cool.
Sorry.
No worries. And finally, we are here for the console log. Console log just accepts any amount of inputs. You can give it 100. It will still work.
Okay.
Okay. Do you want to keep going?
Sure.
Pure functions and side effects. This is very simple. Okay, so a pure function, how do you define a pure function? It's just a function that doesn't interfere with variables in the global scope, and it doesn't have any side effects. Side effects are things like console log, alert messages, things like that. Okay, so a pure function, you just take an input and return an output, and it doesn't change anything in the global scope. That's what a pure function is.
Okay.
Okay, that's it. There's nothing to it. So this one is not a pure function because it's changing the count variable in the global scope. So when you call click and you call in console log count has changed from 0 to 1. So this is not a pure function. But if you created a variable inside click and then changed it and then return it, then it's a pure function.
Okay.
That's all that there is. Okay, closure is going to be hard, but I wrote an alternate explanation for closure. Have you read this though?
I haven't. I've only gotten up to optional arguments. I was
Okay,
afraid to move on because I was feeling so confused.
but you understand that part now, right?
Yeah, it's a lot. It sounds a lot more simple now.
Yeah. So closure is going to be tricky. Okay. I guess I'll just go with this because I wrote this as another way to explain using real world examples. When you create a function, okay, it's like a box or like a bubble, right? As we are already said before. So it's a
Right.
bubble, it's a box, okay? It's got its own scope. And you can think of scope being a bubble. So there's a function one inside this bubble, you have the X input and you have the Y variable. Okay, they're all inside the bubble.
Okay.
The smaller bubble protects the things inside it from the outside world. So that's, we already talked about that scope, right? So you cannot access anything inside the box, inside the bubble from the outside. But you can access things on the outside of the box from inside the box. And we you know that already, right? So if you have a global variable, you can access it from inside. We already went through this, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so that is scope. So when you nest functions, you can access things in the global scope here. This is the global scope, and then you can also access the local variable inside the outer function from within the inner function. So the outer is a bubble, and inside the outer bubble, there's a smaller bubble called inner. And whatever is inside the outer bubble can be accessed within the inner bubble. Okay?
Okay.
It's just scope within the scope.
That makes sense.
So there's three scopes here. The window scope, which is the global scope, which is this, the global variable. This lives in the windows, the global scope. There's a scope of the outer and then the scope of the inner. Okay. So what happens when we run the outer function? Let's see. If we give it a value of 1, 1 is x. Okay, so 1 is going to be assigned to the local variable here. And then we define an inner function which will return the local variable. So local variable is 1, and we're returning inner function. So here you have, this is very tricky. You notice that after inner, there's no brackets. So we're not executing the inner function. We're only returning the inner variable. So this is the function value. This is the function definition. We're returning the whole box. Okay. We're returning the whole inner box, the machine itself. We're not saying execute the machine and then return whatever output it gives. That's not what we're doing here. We're returning the actual box. Okay. So this is tricky. No brackets means we're returning the value, the function value, the function itself. If we did the brackets, it'll return the local variable, which is 1.
Okay.
Okay, so this is very tricky. Okay, so what happens is when we call outer 1, we're returning this function definition with the local variable being set to 1.
Okay.
And then what we do is I will run it here for you. So nothing is console log because right now we are not calling the inner function instance one. But if we did, we'll get the value 1. Okay.
Oh, okay.
So what happened is here we call outer with the value 1. We are returning the inner function itself, the actual function. So this inner function, which is storing the local variable, and we have assigned it as 1. This inner function is returned from outer 1 and assigned to this variable. So all this variable has right now is the function, is this function.
Okay.
And if we execute it, we're basically saying execute this function. And because we have defined x as 1 earlier in this execution, this is going to return 1 because x is basically local variable. Okay, so 1 is local variable is 1. So when we execute this function, which is this function, we get 1.
Okay. I think that makes sense.
Okay, so if we put 5, we'll get 5.
Okay.
You have to just read this a few times and then
Yeah.
So this local variable, which is in this scope here of the outer function, it's attached to this inner function instance 1, which is here. So even though the outer function has executed and it's destroyed, this local variable value, which lives in the scope of the outer function, is not destroyed. It's retained because we still need to use it for the inner function. So this is what closure is about. It's about having access to values and variables and other things in the global scope of a function, even though that global scope has probably already been destroyed.
Okay.
Okay. Do you think this is enough for today?
Probably because I feel like I'm gonna start getting confused.
Yes, I think you will start getting confused if we keep going. Codecademy has free JavaScript course. And it kind of talks about the similar things here.
Okay.
So functions. Etc. So I guess you can ignore arrow functions because we don't go through that in this course. We go through arrow functions in Java in React. So I think in the future you will learn it.
Okay.
Just do this. You can skip arrow functions.
Okay.
It's gonna confuse you more.
Okay. Yeah, this definitely. I think this should help.
Okay.
Oh.
I'll send you the link.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No problem. I have you on Slack, right?
Yes, you do. It's
just mention.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I just got it.
Okay. Well, I will send you the recording as well. So if you want to watch it again, it will be maybe useful.
Oh,
Okay,
that's great. Thank you.
all right. Okay, so I'll see you later then.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for your help.
No problem. Bye bye.
Bye.